Over the last 25 years of education reform in Massachusetts, public schools have been trying to balance the push for higher achievement with the need to keep students from being left behind. In response to concerns by many advocates over the school-to-prison pipeline, educators have been rethinking their practices around student discipline. As a result, there has been a decrease in suspensions in district public schools, but also in charter schools. To talk about one example of the change, we'd like to welcome the head of school from Codman Academy Charter Public School in Dorchester, to B.T. Brown. Thank you very much for being with us again.
It's good to be here, Chris.
I want to start with how your school came up with its version of change around discipline. What went into the mix?
Happy to talk about that. We have been a school for many years that's been interested in the line between preparing students for the real world and having them do what needs to be done within this faker world of school, right? And so for a long time, we talked about the discipline processes in school. So what are we doing internally to help students be accountable to the norms, with the suspension being almost the nuclear option, right? The last thing that would happen. Our rates were relatively high, and so we had a lot of conversations about what are some of the steps we can take to make sure that more students are here for more of the day and learning. And so that conversation led us really towards the path of social emotional learning, development of the holistic nature of schooling and holistic child development, thinking about what are the ways in which we can have children take their own responsibility for their actions so that there's not an external pressure or an external punishment, but rather an internal. And so those are the conversations we had 8 years ago, 9 years ago, that have led to some of the change that we see now in terms of our rates of discipline.
Well, I know at least the notion we have of many charter schools is they run a tighter ship to begin with. Everybody knows that. Parents know it probably. Imagine the students know it. So what was the feedback from parents around this?
I mean, our families want our students to be in school, right? And I think that's true across all schools, be they district public schools, charter, or parochial. I think from the very beginning, our parents have said, we want you to make sure you're taking care of our young people's academic and social emotional development. Do whatever you need to do to make sure that that happens. And I think that when we would come to them and say, hey, part of the reason that your child's struggling is because they're not actually meeting some of these norms in school, they would then support us in that. And I think we've been blessed to have a parent community that has said that. I think many of our parents are also to the point where they say, we want you to do whatever you need to do, but also keep them as much as you can in school. It is a hardship to have parents come in from their jobs to come in for meetings. It's a hardship to have students who are at home during the school day. And so I think that walking that line between high expectations and stern norms, and then also making sure that the discipline is not punitive for families. I think that has been difficult. So wherever we can reduce suspension rates while also maintaining a high quality of education is grateful. Our parents are very grateful.
Another well-known trend, whether suspensions go up or down, is that racial divide in who tends to get suspended the most. What do you take from that?
Well, I'm part of the group of folks who are suspended the most, right? So as a black man, I know that those are the rates in our state, in our country, who are sort of unduly suspended. So I take that very seriously. We have to find ways to attack what feels like systemic racism in our nation and in our city, in our state. So when we look at our data and we talk about who is getting suspended and for what reasons, we have to talk about it from a point of view of what's the perspective here, was there a bias as a part of this, and what are the things that we're doing to ensure that there's fairness and equity with regards to how we discipline our young people. We don't want to see black men and black boys as threats, as most of what our society does. We want to make sure that we are seeing them as the beautiful creatures, human beings, budding adults that they are, and make sure that we do everything in our power to support their development prior to using that suspension.
Well, I guess it seems, is the way you put it, part of the strategy at Codman Academy is to respond to this with, who's teaching in the classrooms and what's being taught. Is that part of this too?
That is absolutely accurate. I mean, we want as much as we can to have people in the classrooms who are culturally competent, who understand who our children are and how they move and grow. We want people, as much as we can, who look like our students. Our demographic mix is about 75% Black, about 20% Latino, and other folks who are part of the remaining 5% or so. And we want our classrooms to then be comfortable and be places of trust and care, so that students are both supporting one another in their growth, and that the teachers are doing so as well.
This is BNN News, and we're talking with Thabiti Brown from Codman Academy Charter Public School. Thabiti, I looked at some of the figures on a report about suspensions from Laura's Committee from Civil Rights, and I guess they sort of peg your school among charters somewhere in the middle, and it's something like more than 40% of the suspensions, they said, were for minor misbehavior. That could mean many different things to different people. Is that a fair characterization? It
is, and I think it's one of the places that many charters have taken the stance that if we pay very close attention to some of these small things, it'll do away with some of the bigger things, right? So uniform, making sure that you're in uniform, you're on time to your classes, you are respectful in your engagement with your peers. Those can seem to be minor, right, from the outside. We know that if you're not doing those basic expectations, you're more likely to also be doing things that are far more disruptive in your classes. One of the conversations we have internally at the school is we want to create an environment in the classes that is productive and supportive for the growth of every child. And so if one child is not on path for that, that's really going to throw off the learning for the other 20 or 22 children in that classroom, right? We can't have that happen. So those minor incidents have in the past at Codman led to suspensions. Our big project now is to make sure we are addressing those minor incidents while also not using suspension as a tool.
I'm a little interested in unpacking something, because I've been a sub-teacher, so I know when students get really disruptive. But why is a uniform so important?
Yeah, so I think it's a symbol, right? If you come into the school building and the expectation in many school buildings, the one I went to, a public school where there was no uniform, was that you don't wear a hat. There was also expectation when you went to church, you don't wear a hat. And you're a student who say, I'm gonna go ahead and wear that hat no matter what, right? It's the only rule that we have here. That student is saying to you, I'm not engaged and on board with the expectations that you're naming, right? Even if it is a minor thing like a hat, right? And so for us, when we say the expectations that you wear uniform, we want all of our students to then embrace that expectation and say, I am on board with the expectations here, writ large. And so it's one of many different ways to show that.
I imagine another way to look at any kind of a problem with a student is that it's part of a larger picture. And I notice that one of the other things you do is a restorative circle. Explain to our viewers, how does that work?
Sure, it's one of my favorite tools that we use. And we have at Codman Academy, from our Ks to our 12, we have processes that include having a circle. And so in K through 5, K through 4, many students then circle up during their morning meeting time. In our 5 through 12, students have what we call crew, which is an advisory program, and that's run in a circle as well. There's something powerful about everybody being able to see each other in that circle and being able to communicate with one another, curriculum that's attached to it and supports that go along with it. If something goes wrong, we can use that advisory circle, we can use the morning meeting circle, or we can use these restorative circles as a tool for having people in a community, a classroom community, talk to each other about what's gone wrong, right? And so it literally is, here's the topic at hand, first person speaks, and then it goes one by one all the way around the circle. Everybody's voice is just as powerful as anybody else's, with the intention of putting on the table what the concerns are, and then getting to a place of saying, how do we heal, right? How do we make this better? It is a way of demonstrating that concept of Ubuntu. It comes out of Africa, that I know most well from South Africa, where it's I am because we are, right? So let's be together in this, and let's find solutions to, maybe there's individual problems, let's find solutions together.